And the legends, there's different legends about where these principles came from. And the one in our legend talks about how Hermes Trismegistus learned them, as well as other wisdom teachings, at the hand of Aesculapius. Thus was born the Hermetic principles, and he wrote them down, and later became deified in the Greek mythology as a god, and in Egyptian mythology as a god, and in Roman mythology as a god, but that he was an actual man. Who knows? Who knows what really happened? It doesn't really matter, because the principles themselves, the wisdom principles themselves, are something that is very workable and practical in our lives. There are 9 Hermetic principles. Usually people hear about the 7 Hermetic principles. They're all sort of very, very interrelated, and some of them almost seem like a repetition of the principle before it, or maybe an extension of the principle before it. The first principle is the principle of mentalism, and if you've heard any of my talks, you'll know this spiel, but we're going to go through it anyway. There are 2 worlds. There's a mortal world and a mental world, but actually that's a misnomer. There's really one world. There's the world of the mental. The mental is the only real world. The mortal world is a shadow world, or a reflection, I like to call it. Its purpose is to give form to that which is mortal in order for us to learn. Okay, so we live in the mortal world so that we can have a reflection of what it is that we're thinking. So it's a mortal representation of that which is invisible. So it makes the invisible visible. The only way that you can make the invisible visible is by putting limitation on it. So in the mental world, there are no limitations. In the mortal world, everything has to exist in regards to limitation. The mortal world is a world of opposites. So the chair is a chair because it's not everything else. Does that make sense? So I'm over here and you're over there because we have bodies. We have physical bodies in the mortal world. The book is a book because it's not everything that's not that book. So everything in the mortal world exists because it is what it is because of what it is not. So in the mortal world, everything is about limitation. Everything is about finite limitations. That's how that's how lines are made, drawn in the mortal world in order to create the visible, in order for our 5 senses to be able to experience what we're thinking. We have to understand that the mortal world and its limitations are false. They are here for our benefit, for our learning. But our problem is that we are not taught, especially as we're growing up, that the mortal world is just a play world. It's just pretend. It's just here for us to learn. It's our school. But the place that we're learning is in our mind, and that everything in the mortal world exists as a reflection of the mind. So if we were taught that at a very young age, we'd have a very, very, very different experience in our lives, and the whole world would too, because we wouldn't take the world as seriously as we do. And since we wouldn't take it so seriously, we wouldn't screw it up as much as we do. Because this world, because we believe that it is real, and we don't understand that the mental world is real, we're afraid in this world, because we are in this world of opposites, and we're in this world of limitations, and therefore we identify with it and think that this is who we are. We think we are mortal, and we think this is our real home. And therefore, we think that we personally are subject to death, because everything in the mortal world is transitory. Everything in the mortal world has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and everything in the mortal world is mortal. That's why we call it the mortal world. Therefore, when we start to identify with the mortal world and think that that's who we are, rather than that's where we're living, that's where we're playing, that this is pretend, then we start getting into a place where we're very, very afraid. We're very afraid because we think that we can be annihilated. Okay, and so the craft teaches us that no, that's not really quite the way it is. The mental world is eternal. Your mind never dies. Your soul, your spirit, however you want to term that, never dies, but that you can have many, many lifetimes. You can exist within the mortal world for as long as necessary in order to remember who you are. Or another word, the way that we actually say that is until you become perfect. So the second principle Hermetic principle is the principle of correspondence. And that's stated as above, so below, or as within, so without. And that reminds us that if we want to know what we're thinking, we can look to the mortal world in whatever area or whatever aspect of our life we want to know what we're thinking about. We can look within the mortal world to find out our thoughts. Because remember, the mortal world exists as an expression or a reflection of our minds. So whatever is in the mortal world has a correspondence within the mental world. So nothing exists in the mortal world without a thought behind it. So everything in the mortal world has a corresponding mental attachment. So if I want to know what I use this all the time. If I want to know what I think about my health, all I have to do is look at my body, and that's what I think about my health. If I want to know what my collection of beliefs are about about money, then all I have to do is look to money. Because remember, it's very difficult for us to keep track of all those little thoughts that we have all the time. That's why we have a mortal world. It keeps track of our thoughts for us. It's here to do that for us. It's here to serve us. We're supposed to be served by the mortal world, but we get that backwards. We think that we are its slave. We think we're a slave to money. We think we're a slave to our health. We think we're a slave to relationships. We think we're a slave to the weather, whatever it is. We think that we are slaves of the mortal world, but actually that's backward. Our mortal experience is here to serve us and serve our learning so that it can show us what our consciousness is, not only individually, but collectively as well. So, once we get it down on an individual level, our next experience is to look within the mortal world and see how we are as a species, how we are as a community. So if you have a coven, or if you have a spiritual group, or if you just even your family, if you want to know what your group mind is about a specific topic, you look within the results that you're having within the mortal world of that which corresponds to that topic within your group. So, like if you have a coven and you're having interpersonal relationship problems, then there's something that's a reflection within the group mind, that there's some problem within the group mind that gets to be healed. So that's why we say that all of our problems are our personal lesson plan, our personal curriculum, and also our collective lesson plan, our collective curriculum. Every problem that we have is here for us to learn. The only lesson that we should learn, remember, is what is it that we're thinking? What is it in our mind that needs to be healed? Because until it's healed within our mind, any solution that we have within the mortal world by mortal means is temporary at best. So the principle of correspondence just reminds us to look within the mortal world to find what we're thinking. That the mortal world is not an end in itself, that it is here to represent to us our consciousness, both individually and collectively. All right, so the next principle of Hermetics is the law of cause and effect, or the principle of cause and effect. So cause and effect is the bottom line metaphysical law. And it's a further refinement of the law of mentalism. Do you see how that happened? The law of mentalism got refined into the law of correspondence so that we recognize that the mortal world was a reflection. And now the law of cause and effect is another distillation of that, a little different stating of the same idea, the same principle, that everything within the mortal world is an effect of something within our minds. So nothing happens by accident or by chance. Every effect has a cause attached to it. You don't get something for nothing. There's a law of consequence. So nothing just happens. There's a cause before the effect. And when I say before, that's just in the mortal world, we understand things in terms of time, in terms of linear time, beginning, middle, and end. But actually, if you look within the mental world, cause and effect are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. So you can't separate cause from effect. But in our experience, remember that we only understand the effects because the effect is the mortal world, and the mortal world is our school. So the purpose of the law of cause and effect, or the principle of cause and effect, is to teach. And the bottom line lesson is that every effect was caused within the mind. Every effect, mortal effect, was caused within the mind. So anytime we are tempted to whine and moan about how we are victimized within the mortal world, and even that, though that seems very, very true, once we know the truth, we get to go back and ask ourselves, what was the cause? What was the cause? Where in my mind was this cause? And that should be very, very good news for all of us, because that way we're not victimized. Now, I am not saying that a baby who gets cancer caused that consciously. I'm not saying that someone who got raped was just asking for it. That is a very juvenile interpretation of what we're talking about here. Not at all. Not at all. I'm not saying that we should be discompassionate and that we should blame victims, so-called victims within the world. Absolutely not. Remember, I also said that there's a difference. There's both an individual mind and a collective consciousness. So when someone is in pain, they don't need us to say, you really caused that reality for yourself. That's not what they need from us. What they need from us is our love and our compassion, because remember, if everything within the physical mortal world is an effect of a cause, is an effect of something mental, then the only mental cause that can transcend all other causes and bring about healing is love. Because remember, we've talked about this many, many times, that in our teachings there's only two types of emotions, relaxed and tense. And tense emotions, tense thoughts, create tense results, create unhappy, unnatural results. Whereas relaxed thoughts, relaxed emotions create peaceful, relaxed, positive, and natural, what we would call natural results. So a person who has a very, very happy life, you can guarantee that they have very peaceful thoughts. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have trying circumstances. Not at all. It's not what the mind caused at that point that is the question. It is how we respond to or react to the mortal world that is the question. Once there's an effect in the mortal world, it's too late to change the thought. The effect has already happened. Our job is to say, well, now what are we going to do? How are we going to respond to that? Have you noticed that some people are always real calm in a crisis, and they seem to get a lot done, and it doesn't seem to be as big of a crisis because of their presence? That's because that person carries love. And another way to say love is carries a peaceful or relaxed spirit within them. And that's what we all want to be. That's what we want to have now, is we want to be able to transcend all of these tense emotions so that no matter what happens, we have a new cause that will create a new effect in the mortal world. So no matter what the effect is, the only response that's appropriate from our perspective is love, is compassion, is forgiveness, is healing. So that's the ultimate cause. The ultimate cause is relaxation, is peace. And another way of saying that is love. Okay, so then we have the principle of relationship, which is a further refinement of the principle of correspondence. Right? So we have everything is in relationship. There is nothing that is not relationship. People talk about, well, I've got to have, I want to work on my relationships, and then I want to work on my money, and then I want to work on my body, and then I want to work on this, and I've got all these topics, and relationships is just one. Remember, there's nothing but relationship. How we relate to the different, quote, facets of our life is everything. So if we can get clean on our ability to relate, everything else gets clear. Which goes back to the last thing we just talked about with cause and effect, that our relationship to one another and to our bodies and to our lives and to our minds and to our finances and to our everything and to the world at large, if we are really serious about this stuff, the only way of healing those relationships and having the highest possible relationship is by relaxing. And that is what we talk about when we talk about meditation. So meditation is the ultimate relationship. When we meditate, we are meditating with ourselves, but it's ourselves with a capital S, not the little self, not the little personality that we've made up over the years. It's the big self, who we really are. Have you noticed that there's a part of us that's always noticing, that's always witnessing something in the world? So there's a part of us, like say we're in a real trashy moment in our lives, a real icky, awful moment. And there's a part of us that might be freaking out. But if you're really aware, there's a part of us that's noticing the part of us that's freaking out. And the part of us that's noticing, that's us. And that's the ultimate relationship. That's what we want to really kindle that relationship and really foster a clean relationship with that self, because that's where all of our intuition comes from. That's where all of our healing comes from. That's where all of our real legitimate power comes from. So the more we are able to have that relationship with ourself, the more we're able to relate to our so-called higher power, God, Goddess, our mental teacher. There's a lot of different ways of talking about these things. And that in turn colors our relationships with people and with events and with topics in different areas of our lives. So the more we get clean on our relationship with ourselves, the better off we are in relationship with everything. And like we said, there is only relationship in this world. That's all we have. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the mortal world, I think, exists, because if there's only one mind, if there's only one of us really here, I mean, if you get really esoteric about it, there's no divisions in the mental world. Therefore, there's really only one person here, which is the esoteric meaning of the term Christ. So if there's only one, when they say there's only one begotten Son of God, well, that doesn't mean that there's some dude up in the sky named Jesus. It means that we are all it. We're all part of that body of Christ. That's what they're talking about. That's the esoteric meaning of that. So if that's the case, then the only purpose for having a mortal world is so that we could experience relationship. So somehow we got screwed up, and we got, like we talked about before, we got afraid in the mortal world, and our relationships became based on fear. And so we got very afraid, and that's why we fight, and that's why we have wars, and that's why we have all kinds of problems. So the closer we can get to our true selves, and that the self with the capital S, the closer we are with everyone. And I think in a real profound way, the more we foster that relationship, the more healing can actually be done within the world. A lot of people say, well, what should we do, about the Middle East? What should we do about the war in Iraq? What should we do about the weapons of mass destruction? What should we do? What can we do? And my response to that, if I'm really being clear on that, if I'm not getting caught up in the panic of it all, is there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do except for quiet our minds and foster the relationship with our true self. And that, in turn, calms the group mind down profoundly. Have you noticed that if it's really, really dark, all it takes is somebody lighting one little teeny match, and all the focus is on the light, not the darkness. So it just takes one of us at any moment in time creating a little bit more light, and all the focus in the whole world shifts from darkness to light. Isn't that cool? I love that. So the principle of relationship is very profound. All right, now we have the principle of progression. And the principle of progression is stating that everything is in a series of progression, from the purely mortal to the purely spiritual. It is basically talking about evolution. So, there's a lot of ways of looking at this, and this is my way of looking at it. And I'm not ever wanting anybody to think that I have the answers. This is just my take on these things. From my perspective, everybody's already perfect. And everybody's already in love. Everybody's already in this perfect place of peace and happiness. And everything is working beautifully. And we also have the freedom to think other thoughts. So on top of that peace, freedom, and happiness, we are thinking thoughts of separation. We're thinking thoughts of lack. We're thinking thoughts of war, of anger, of hatred, of fear, of all these things, right? So our job is to progress, but not progress into something that we aren't, but to progress back to who we really are. So for me, the principle of progression doesn't mean that we're going outside of ourselves to go get more things, to go get more perfection, to go become a better person. The principle of progression, from my perspective, means that we are chipping away at all which is imperfect, all of the lies, all of the falseness, all of the darkness, which is unreal. And what we come up with as we start to do that is we recognize that there is no mortal world. We get to live here, we get to have fun here, but it's not real. And the way we progress back to the so-called spirit, the spiritual world, is by remembering who we are and why we're here. Who we are is we're stars. We are created as just the way perfection created everything perfect. We are created perfect. So if you want to say God, let's say that word for a minute. Just we use the word God. So God created us in his or her image, and his or her image is perfection. But then also we got all of the goodies that God has. That means that we get the mind to create, and we get to have the free will to do whatever we want to do. And therefore we get to create a pseudo world for ourselves if we choose to do that. And we can create a world that is dark and scary and all of that. But that doesn't mean that it's real. That means that we just that we got to play that game if we wanted to. So the principle of progression for me means progressing back to who we really are. It means coming home, not going far away. It means going deeper within. All right, so then we have the principle of vibration. And remember, the principle of vibration is talking about the fact that everything moves. Everything is alive. There's no dead matter. Everything is alive. So that's why the mortal world is a joke. Because if you look subatomically, if you have the power to do that, if you have those kinds of microscopes and tools that those physicists have, they are able to look and see that what we see as solid matter is absolutely not solid. In fact, it gets to the point where it's waves of energy. And there's no real anything in the mortal world. It's just pretend. It's just a construct. Everything has a vibration. So that's why the mortal world doesn't really exist. It's just a reflection. So what we want to do, what we're talking about in terms of the principle of vibration, is an extension of the principle of progression. We are raising our vibrations from the low, dense vibrations of what we might call the mortal world to the high vibrations of what we might call the celestial world. And the only way to do that is through relaxation, because the more refined we want our vibration to be, the more we have to relax. The less tension we have, the more we speed up our vibration. When we speed up our vibration, we are actually speeding up our progress. We're speeding up our evolution. So there's a lot of there's a lot of esoteric stuff that I won't go into about the principle of, well, all these principles, but especially the principle of vibration. There's different octaves. There's all kinds of wonderful things that are known about the principle of vibration. But just know that for our purposes here, the principle of vibration is the more we relax, and the more we find relaxation and peace, and the more we are able to sit and meditate and say yes to our inner teacher and our true self, the more we are raising our vibrations. And the more our vibrations are raised, the more other people's vibrations are raised. Why? Because everybody wants it. It's what everybody wants. Everybody wants more love. They want more peace. They want more joy. They want happiness. They want that. Everybody craves that. I don't care who they are. That's what they really want. They may be really, really entrenched in their illness in this world, but the more you show everybody else what life could be like by being the change, by being a high vibration, by being a peaceful person, by example, your teaching, and everybody will follow your lead. And that's just how it goes. So we all have a responsibility to raise our vibrations every day, more and more, to become more spiritually fit. It's like going to aerobics class or going to lift weights. We get more toned spiritually. We lose excess spiritual weight, and we become very strong spiritually. And we raise our vibrations, and everybody else looks at that and says, I want to do that. I want to be that. I wonder what they're doing. And even if it's on a very subliminal level, we have a lot of power to heal the world just by raising our vibrations. Okay, then we have the principle of polarity. And the principle of polarity states that everything has a positive and a negative pole. All right? And so, just like a battery, a magnet. If you take a magnet and you split it down the middle, trying to separate the positive and negative pole, what you get is two new magnets, each with a positive and a negative pole. So you can't split positive. There is no such thing as positive and negative as separate from one another. They are one item. It's two sides of the same coin. So what that tells us is, by the principle of correspondence, is as above, so below, that everything in the mental world is a unified whole. All right. So now, if you look at the principle of polarity in terms of the principle of vibration, so everything we're talking about the very, very dense vibrations of the mortal world versus the very, very high spiritual vibrations of the celestial world. So if you think about that wherever there's a low vibration, there's a possibility for a high vibration. And wherever there's a high vibration, there's a possibility for a very low vibration. Everything's within the realm of possibilities of having that principle of polarity. And we need them both in the mortal world to have a charge. But to understand how we can use the principle of polarity in our lives is we have to remember that everything that we need already exists within our minds. So if there's a negative so-called experience in our lives, that all we have to do is apply the principle of polarity and recognize that it has a positive correspondence. And all we have to do is focus our mind on what that is, and the situation heals. And like I said before, ultimately, the way to get there is by relaxing. The only power to heal all of this stuff is love. Okay, the principle of rhythm is talking about the principle of flows. So that's what the tides are all about. That's what the moon is all about. That's what our solar system is all about. That's we breathe in and out. Our heart beats. Everything in our life is rhythm. And we need to tune into the rhythms of life in order to be able to work with them. So how many times have we fought against the current? Have we fought against the tide, trying to make something happen? When in fact, had we understood the principle of rhythm, we could have tuned into the natural rhythm of whatever that part of our lives was and caught the wave and just gone with the flow to exactly where we were supposed to be. Have you noticed that the planet doesn't try to spin? The solar system doesn't try to orbit the sun? That it all just happens without any help from any of us individually, from any personality. And so the same power that has the ability to create a tree from an acorn has the same ability to help you and I with any issue of our lives, just by us relaxing and finding the rhythm and following that rhythm so that we can allow ourselves to magnetically draw unto us that which we need for our good, rather than trying to effort and make things happen, trying to get in there and do it on purpose. All right, so then we have the principle of gender. And the principle of gender is male, female, which is obviously an extension of the principle of polarity. In the mortal world, everything exists as either male or female. And whenever something's androgynous, people tend to ridicule it. And that's because in the mortal world, everything is here as opposites. Everything is opposite in the mortal world. So, but in the mental world, according to our legends, back in the beginning, all the Creator was actually a collection of minds, and it was all a mental being. And the Creator, as this mental being, these beings lived together, but there were no bodies, and so there was no division, and there was no male or female. There was only the principle or the potential of male and female. So in the spiritual world, male and female is one. In the mortal world, male and female is split. So we have to understand that if you look in terms of the Father, the Divine Father, we recognize the Divine Father as the Son, as a representation for us in our faith as being the Son. We don't necessarily believe, we don't necessarily worship the actual physical ball of fire called the Sun. We respect it, but we understand that it's symbolic of our Father, because it is the nurturing aspect. I mean, not the nurturing. It's the fertilizing aspect of the earth. It is the power source from which we came. The earth we recognize as being our mother, and she is the fertility. And actually, the Father does fertilize the mother, but she's the nurturer. She's the one that gives birth. Okay, recognize that in the celestial world or the spiritual world, the Father and Mother are joined. They're the same thing. But in our experience, they're very, very separate, because in the mortal world, they're very, very separate. So what we have to understand is that we being beings that live on earth, we are all, did you know that we all start out as female in the womb? All of us. And it's not until, I don't remember where it is, it's somewhere in the first trimester that the male gender starts to show itself. But we're all female. Every part of the earth is female. Why? Because that is a message from above, that what we are here to do is receive. We're not here to do. We're here to receive. We're here to receive God's love. We're here to receive the sunlight. And we're here to be taught. We're here as students, not as teachers. Even if some of us are teachers, the only way we can truly teach on this earth is by being taught and showing others that we can be taught. So what we want to do is be the vessels for spiritual energy. We want to be the vessels for that masculine force. We want to be receptive to that masculine force of God, so that we can, all of us, give birth to the world that we would rather see, the world that is truly ours, the world that people would call Nirvana, the world that people might call Avalon, the world that people might call the New Jerusalem. There's so many terms for it, heaven on earth. That is potentially ours at any moment if we would but receive the seed from God and allow that world to be born, and allow ourselves to be taught and to be passive, and not try to make everything happen, not try to act like we know what we're doing here. So that was just a basic introduction to the Hermetic principles, just barely scratching the surface. There's a lot more to talk about, but I hope that you found that helpful. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to hear from you soon. Don't forget to email us and visit our website at thedcw.org. Blessed be.